On Meet the Press, Chuck Todd interviewed Bernie Sanders, and he tried to spin a false narrative on Bernie Sanders when it comes to both gun control and the Black Lives Matter movement. But as you're going to see, Bernie Sanders was not having any of it.
Good to be with you, Chuck.
You're in Louisiana, so let me start with the tragic news there and get into the politics of it a little bit, which is having to do with the issue of gun control. A lot of Democrats, President Obama has expressed some remorse that he hasn't been able to make more progress on gun control. And you've continued to walk straddle a line here. You talk about your sort of pro-NRA votes in Vermont having to do with being about Vermont, not about the nation as a whole.
Chuck, that's not what I said. I come from a state which has virtually no gun control, and yet I voted to ban certain types of assault weapons. I voted to close the gun show loophole, and I voted for instant background checks. And what I said is that as a nation, we can't continue screaming at each other, or else we've got to find common ground.
Well, what is that? What is that?
Because common ground is, for a start, universal instant background checks. Nobody should have a gun who has a criminal background, who's involved in domestic abuse situations. People should not have guns who are going to hurt other people, who are unstable. And second of all, I believe that we need to make sure that certain types of guns used to kill people exclusively, not for hunting, they should not be sold in the United States of America. And we have a huge loophole now with gun shows that should be eliminated. There may be other things that we have to do. But coming from a rural state, I think I can communicate with folks coming from urban states where guns mean different things than they do in Vermont, where it's used for hunting. That's where we've got to go. We don't have to argue with each other and yell at each other. We need a common sense solution.
You last night spoke at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Of course, it's a major civil rights organization, a lot of history there. But I want to play a clip that you had sort of a reaction last week at Netroots Nation in a confrontation with the Black Lives Matter protest.
I didn't have a confrontation. What I had was, I was there to speak about immigration reform. And some people started disrupting the meeting. And the issue that they raised was, in fact, a very important issue about Black Lives Matter, about Sandra Bland, about black people getting yanked out of, in this case of Sandra Bland, getting yanked out of an automobile, thrown to the ground, and ending up dead 3 days later because of a minor traffic violation. So this is not these are issues which is a very important issue, an issue of concern that I strongly share.
Well, I guess there were some people who felt that you were being too dismissive of the protesters.
No, I'm not dismissive. I've been involved in the civil rights movement all of my life. And I believe that we have to deal with this issue of institutional racism. But this is what I also believe. And speaking to the SCLC last night, this is what I quoted. Martin Luther King, when he died, when he was assassinated, understood and was working on a poor people's march. We have to end institutional racism, but we have to deal with the reality that 50% of young black kids are unemployed, that we have massive poverty in our country, and we have an unsustainable level of income and wealth inequality.
The criticism that's come to you at this, though, is that your answer is always economic injustice, and that many African-American activists believe, no. You've got to deal with race. Racism is a separate, institutional racism is a separate problem from economic injustice.
They are parallel problems. They are absolutely correct. But as Martin Luther King Jr. told us, we have to address both. We have to rid this country of racism. We saw in Charleston, South Carolina, a few weeks ago, a guy motivated by hate groups who goes out and kills black people because they're black. Sandra Bland being yanked out of a car, dying 3 days later for what? For minor traffic violation. But my view is that we have got to deal with the fact that the middle class of this country is disappearing, that we have millions of people working for wages that are much too low, impacts everybody, impacts the African-American community even more. Those are issues that do have to be dealt with just at the same time as we deal with institutional racism.
What you just watched was Chuck Todd getting owned by Bernie Sanders. He called Bernie's votes on gun control pro-NRA. Now, this is in spite of the fact that Bernie scored an F with the NRA, indicating that he is both anti-gun and pro-gun control. So clearly, they don't like Bernie Sanders' policies. Now, what is his policies? Well, Bernie Sanders actually took control of the situation, and he stated, no, I did vote to ban certain types of assault rifles. I voted yes on mandatory background checks, and I voted to close gun show loopholes. Now, if you have a brain, you can surmise that all of these are not pro-gun or pro-NRA policies. So that was a really nice try on Chuck Todd's part to try to discredit Bernie Sanders, but clearly it wasn't working. Now, Chuck then turned to the Netroots Nation conference where Bernie was met with Black Lives Matter protesters. And what Chuck Todd tried to do was frame it as a confrontation, but Bernie stopped him by saying, no, I actually agree with what they are saying wholeheartedly. And then Todd then said that Bernie was being criticized for focusing on economic injustice, and that was true at the time, but Bernie has actually shifted gears to focus on both economic injustice and systemic racism. So again, Bernie Sanders had to correct Chuck Todd and say, actually, no, I've shifted focus. I think that the Black Lives Matter protesters made sense. I agree with them, and now I am trying to address their issues through policy. So that was a great takedown of a media hack that is Chuck Todd. So now, what is Chuck Todd's agenda? See, Todd thinks that Bernie is far left, and he really wants to discredit Bernie Sanders on issues such as gun control and institutional racism, so that way far left voters will think, well, maybe Bernie Sanders isn't so liberal on some issues, so Hillary must be to the left of him on these issues, therefore I should vote for Hillary Clinton. But I mean, why does Chuck care about this? I mean, does he have a horse in this race? Well, he does, actually. See, what he gains from discrediting Bernie Sanders is that he gets to protect the establishment. You see, Bernie Sanders is actually not a part of the establishment. Chuck Todd is part of the establishment, as is the rest of the media. So now Bernie wants to get money out of politics, and this would directly impact the bottom line of Chuck Todd's bosses. Now, seeing that Todd likes his job and Todd wants to keep his job, what Todd wants to do is maintain that job by ensuring that his boss's profits keep rolling in. So he can do that by discrediting any candidate that is not part of the establishment. So when the Koch brothers give NBC $2 million to launch an attack ad against the Democrats, or vice versa, when the Democrats do it as well, so Chuck Todd and all these other mainstream media outlets benefit from that, and they get to keep their jobs. But guess what, Chuck Todd? Bernie Sanders is onto you, and he's not having it. So if you really want to try to get him off of the issues, you're going to have to try harder than that, because he's sticking to the topics, and he's not going to fall for any of that.